The kiss lasted 7 seconds. I know because I counted, and because my best friend Iris was the kind of person who would have counted too if our positions had been reversed. We had agreed to practice. That was the word we used. Practice. Like it was a drill. Like there was a skill being acquired and a test being prepared for, instead of what it actually was, which was me asking the only person whose face I had memorized in 10 years of friendship to put her mouth on mine and pretend that was a small thing. It was not a small thing. I knew it the second she leaned in. So did she. Neither of us said it. If you want to hear uncensored, too hot for YouTube stories, check out my Patreon in the description. Tell us where you are watching from and subscribe. We had been best friends for 10 years. That is the part that mattered. That is the part that would always matter, even after everything that came next, even after the silence that started at second 8 and went on for 3 days. Even after I had to look at her over the rim of a coffee mug at our shared kitchen counter on a Wednesday morning in March, and pretend my hands were not shaking. 10 years. We met when we were 18, in the second week of our first semester at a college neither of us had been first choice at. I was a Filipino-American kid from the north side of Chicago who had been told by every adult in her life to pick the practical major, and I had compromised by picking English literature with a minor in something called editorial production, which my mother described as the kind of degree you mention quickly at a dinner party. Iris Kavanagh had transferred from Dublin 2 months before that semester started, on a scholarship she had won by submitting a portfolio of hand-drawn graphics to a design competition I still did not fully understand the prestige of, and she had walked into our shared dormitory kitchen on a Tuesday evening with her dark hair pulled back and her sleeves pushed up to the elbow and asked, in an accent that I had never heard outside of films, if I knew where the salt was. I had told her there was no salt. She had stood there for a long second, holding a pot of pasta water, looking at me as if she was deciding whether I was funny or simply unhelpful. And then she had laughed. It is not, I will admit, the most cinematic origin story. There was no eye contact across a crowded lecture hall. There was no specific moment of recognition. There was a girl with bare feet on linoleum asking about salt, and there was me, 24 hours into a homesickness I had not yet learned to name. And there was the way her laugh had filled a kitchen that had until then been the most institutional space I had ever lived in, and there was the small, decisive feeling I had not yet learned to call relief, that this person was going to be in my life, and that my life was going to get better because of it. We had been best friends for 10 years. I tell you that part first because everything else only makes sense if you understand it. The practice kissing did not come out of nowhere. It came out of 10 years of breakfasts in mismatched mugs and shared coats in winter, and her holding my hair back the night I drank too much at the publishing internship Christmas party, and me sitting in the back of an emergency room with her at 22 when she dislocated her shoulder falling off a bicycle in Lincoln Park. It came out of 1,000 small inheritances we had built up across a decade. Her smell, which was clean linen and faint sandalwood, and the specific brand of moisturizer she had been using since college. The sound of her on the phone with her mother in Dublin, switching from English into a softer Irish lilt without noticing. The particular way she sighed when she was disappointed in something I had done, which I had always taken with disproportionate seriousness because Iris was almost never disappointed in anything. It came out of 3 months of being roommates. That part was new. That part was the part I had not adjusted to yet. My lease had ended in December. I had been with the same publishing house for 4 years by then, my career inching forward in the slow, unglamorous way that careers in publishing inch, and I had been single for the better part of a year after a long relationship with a man named Daniel ended in the way long relationships end when one person finally admits they have been waiting for the other to feel something they were never going to feel. I had told my friends I was not in a hurry. I had told myself I was not in a hurry. I had told the building manager that I was looking for somewhere new and would have something sorted by January. I had not had something sorted by January. Iris had said, on a Saturday in late November when we were sitting on the floor of my half-packed apartment eating Thai food directly from the containers, that her spare room had been empty for 8 months, and that she did not see why I should pay first month and last month and a security deposit somewhere across town when she had a perfectly good room in a perfectly good building 3 blocks from my office. I had said, "Are you sure?" She had said, "Mira, please." I had said, "I will pay you rent." She had said, "That is not the question I asked." I had moved in on the 2nd of January. The first month had been easy in the way moving in with your best friend is easy, the way it is supposed to be easy. The comfort of someone who already knows how you take your coffee, and which side of the bed you sleep on, and what you say when you are processing something hard versus when you have already finished processing it. We had fallen into a rhythm in 72 hours. I had unpacked my books onto her shelves. She had cleared a row in the bathroom for my things. We had bought a single new throw blanket together, navy with a cream stripe, because she had said the apartment needed a throw blanket and I had agreed. And the throw blanket had become a small, ongoing joke between us, the way small, ongoing jokes become the architecture of any shared life. The second month had been less easy. I do not know exactly when the recalibration started. I know it was somewhere in the middle of February, somewhere in the long, flat stretch of Chicago winter, where the light leaves at 4:30, and the wind off the lake is a personal insult. And I know that it had to do with the fact that being in the same apartment as Iris Kavanagh for 57 consecutive days had begun to do something to my nervous system that I had not been prepared for. She moved through the apartment in a way I could not stop tracking. Coming out of the shower in the morning with her hair wrapped in a towel, no makeup, the soft pale of her face still warm from the water. Standing at the kitchen counter in the soft gray sweatshirt she had owned since college, sleeves pushed up, drinking coffee with her phone held in her left hand and her right hand absently rubbing the back of her neck. Sitting on the couch in the evening with her knees pulled up and her laptop balanced on them, the blue light of the screen catching on the line of her jaw, the small frown of concentration she got when she was working through a difficult layout. I had known her for 10 years. I had seen all of these things 1,000 times. What was different in February was that I had begun to notice them. I do not mean noticing in the way you notice a friend. I mean noticing in the specific, dangerous way you notice someone whose presence in a room you have begun to feel in your skin before your mind has caught up. I mean noticing the temperature drop of 3 degrees when she walked away from a doorway. I mean cataloging, against my will, the precise distance between us on the couch when we were watching a film, and feeling the distance close by an inch when she shifted her weight, and then by another inch, and then feeling the entire surface of my left arm light up like a coastline in a thunderstorm because her elbow had brushed mine. I told myself it was the proximity. I told myself it was a phase. I told myself it was the deeply specific kind of intimacy that happens when you live with someone you love, and that everyone who lived with their best friend went through some version of it, and that the only difference between this and 1,000 other versions of it was that I happened to be a person who paid too much attention to my own internal weather. I told myself a lot of things. I did not tell Iris any of them. By the end of February, I had stopped sleeping well. I had not connected the two facts immediately because I was, by training and temperament, the kind of person who edited inconvenient narratives out of the running before they became chapters. I had told myself I was not sleeping well because of work, because of a particularly difficult manuscript that had landed on my desk in early February, because of the ambient seasonal misery that hit every Chicago resident in the back half of winter. I had told myself this until the night I lay awake at 3 a.m. listening to Iris move around in the kitchen. She had insomnia sometimes, And on those nights she made tea and stood at the window looking out at the street. And I had felt, with absolute clarity, the specific shape of what I was actually thinking about, which was not work and not winter. And I had pressed the heels of my hands against my eyes and said out loud into the dark, "Oh no." The next day, I had downloaded a dating app. This is, I am aware, not the rational person's response to the realization I had just had. The rational person's response would have been to sit with it. The rational person's response would have been to write in a journal or call a therapist or take a long walk. The rational person's response would have been, at minimum, to not begin actively dating other people in the same week she discovered she was in love with her 10-year best friend / 3-month roommate. I am, when properly motivated, a deeply irrational person. I told myself the dating app was a reset. I told myself I had been single for a year and was clearly displacing some general loneliness onto the most available target, and that what I needed was to actually meet new people and remember that my heart was a functional organ designed to attach to a wide range of acceptable adults. I told myself, when I changed the settings on the app from men only to women too, that this was simply being open-minded. I told myself, when I matched within 48 hours with a woman named Talia Brody, whose photograph showed her standing on a paddleboard with the kind of confident, sun-warmed smile that people who grew up near actual sunlight have, that this was excellent. This was healthy. This was me being a person in the world. I did not tell Iris about the app. I told myself I would tell her when there was something to tell. There was something to tell within a week. Talia and I exchanged messages for 4 days. She was 31, 3 years older than me, an architect at a firm in the West Loop, originally from California, transplanted to Chicago 5 years ago. She wrote in complete sentences. She used punctuation. She asked me one good question about the manuscript I mentioned in passing, and then asked me a second good question about my answer to the first one, which is the kind of conversational rigor I had given up on finding in dating apps several years before I had stopped using them. She asked me if I wanted to get coffee on a Sunday afternoon. I said yes. I told Iris on the Saturday morning before the coffee. I told her in the kitchen while she was making toast, because I had decided that the most casual setting was the right setting to deliver the information that would make the conversation casual. The strategy did not survive contact with the actual moment. I said, "Hey, I have a thing tomorrow." And Iris said, without looking up from the toast, and I said, "I matched with someone on the app. And we are having coffee in Wicker Park at 3, and I would appreciate if you did not panic about it." Iris did look up then. She was holding a butter knife. I remember this very specifically because I was looking at her hands instead of her face, the way you look at the safer thing in a room. The butter knife was a small one, the cheap stainless one we had inherited from college, and Iris was holding it the way she held everything, without thinking about it, with the casual competence of a person who had moved through the world in her own body for 28 years. She said, "Why would I panic?" I said, "I don't know." "You wouldn't." She said, "Who is she?" She. I had not used a pronoun. I had said someone. I had said matched with someone, and Iris had absorbed it and identified in less than 3 seconds that this someone was a woman, and she had said it to me with no inflection at all, the way you might confirm a delivery address. I felt my face go warm. I said, "Talia. She is an architect. She is from California originally. She seems—" I trailed off, because I did not know how she seemed. I had not met her. I had read 4 days of messages. Iris said, "She seems what?" I said, "She seems nice." Iris went back to the toast. The butter knife resumed its previous activity. She said, in the same level tone she had been using the entire conversation, "Well, that's good. Coffee is a low-stakes first thing." I said, "Yes." She said, "Wicker Park is good. There are lots of places." I said, "Yes." She said, Are you nervous? I said no. She said, You are? I said, A little. She set the butter knife down. She turned to face me fully. She was wearing the gray sweatshirt and the soft black leggings she slept in, no makeup, her hair pulled back loosely, and she looked at me with the open, appraising attention she had been looking at me with for 10 years, and she said, Mira, you have been on first dates before. You are good at first dates. I said, I have not been on a first date with a woman before. The kitchen was very quiet. Iris said, Ah. I said, Yeah. She said, Is that the part you are nervous about? I said, Partly. She said, What is the other part? I said, I have not kissed a woman before. I do not know why I said it. I had not planned to say it. I had planned to mention the date in passing and let Iris ask whatever questions she wanted to ask, and answer them with the manageable amount of detail that would make the entire situation feel like a normal Saturday morning conversation between two people who had spent 10 years learning the specific calibration of each other's privacy. I had planned, very specifically, not to bring up the question of kissing. The question of kissing was a question I had been thinking about, in a low, anxious register, for most of the 4 days of messaging with Talia. I had been thinking about it the way you think about any new physical task. What the angle would be, what to do with your hands, how to manage the geometry of a face that did not have the architectural features I had spent my entire dating life navigating around. I had not planned to ask my best friend/roommate to assist with this question. I had not planned to ask. And yet, standing in our kitchen on a Saturday morning in March with the toast cooling on the counter, and Iris Kavanagh looking at me with the expression of a person who was actively deciding what kind of friend to be in this moment, the question had presented itself. Iris said, Do you want me to? She stopped. I said, What? She said, No. I said, Iris. She said, Mira. I was about to offer something incredibly stupid and I have caught myself. Please let me move past it. I said, What were you about to offer? She said, Mira. I said, Were you about to offer to? She said, Do not finish that sentence. I said, Were you? She did not answer. I am not, in normal circumstances, a person who pushes against a closed door. I had spent 10 years respecting the precise architecture of Iris Kavanagh's private spaces, the things she said and the things she did not say, the way she held back the specific edges of her opinions until you actually asked for them. I knew her well enough to know when a door had closed. I knew her well enough to know that the kind, decent thing was to let it stay closed. I said, Please. She looked at me. She had eyes the color of gray Atlantic weather, and she had been looking at me with those eyes across kitchens and hallways and lecture halls and emergency rooms and 1,000 mornings of 1,000 specific weeks, and I had never, in 10 years of knowing her, asked her for anything she had been unwilling to give. She said, Mira, this is a bad idea. I said, Why? She said, Because I am your friend. I said, I know. She said, Because you are my friend. I said, I know. She said, Because you are about to go on a date with someone you might actually like, and if we, practice anything tonight, you are going to spend the entire date on Sunday thinking about this kitchen instead of thinking about her. I said, That is a very specific worry, Iris. She said, It is a worry I have given some thought to. That landed. I would think about that sentence later. I would think about that sentence specifically, the way she had said it, the small concession in the words some thought. I would think about how much thought, exactly, she had given to the specific question of whether kissing me would make me think about her instead of someone else, and I would think about the fact that this was not the kind of question a person gave thought to in passing. I would think about it. In the moment, I said, Just one. As a favor. So I am not standing in a doorway tomorrow with my brain locked up like a bad printer. Iris closed her eyes briefly. She said, Mira Solano, you are making this very difficult. I said, Please. She opened her eyes. She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, "Fine. Once. And we are not going to make a whole thing of it." I said, "No whole thing." She said, "No whole thing." She said, "After the toast." We ate the toast standing at the counter. Iris had hers with butter and a small amount of honey, the way she had always had it. And I had mine plain, the way I had always had mine. And we did not talk during the eating, and the kitchen had the particular acoustic quality of a kitchen in which two people were carefully not making a thing of anything. When we had finished, Iris washed her hands at the sink. I noticed this. It was such a small, unnecessary gesture. We had not been handling anything. And yet it was the kind of thing a person did when they were buying themselves 3 additional seconds of preparation. She turned around. She leaned against the counter. The light through the kitchen window was the soft, late-morning gray of a Chicago March, and it landed on her in a way I had been trying for several weeks not to look at directly. She said, "All right." I said, "All right." She said, "Come here." I came over. We were standing about a foot apart. The kitchen, which had been the center of our shared life for 3 months, had contracted to the size of those 12 inches. Iris said, "Mira, we are going to do this once. Quickly. And then I am going to pour us both more coffee, and we are going to talk about something else, and we are not going to revisit this." I said, "Yes." She said, "Do you understand?" I said, "Yes." She said, "All right." She put one hand, very lightly, at the side of my jaw. Just the fingertips, cool from the water, faintly damp. Her thumb settled against the hinge of my jaw with the precision of a person who paid attention to the small details, which she always had been, for 10 years, in every context. She said, "Breathe." I had not realized I had stopped. I breathed. She leaned in. "I will tell you, because it is the entire point of the story, what I thought it would be. I thought it would be like the kisses I had given and received in the back rows of college parties, and the front seats of cars, and the doorways of apartments I had moved out of. I thought it would be functional. I thought it would be something my body had practiced enough times to handle on autopilot, the way my body handled bicycles and stairs, and the specific physical task of opening a wine bottle. I thought it would tell me, mechanically, what to do tomorrow, and I would absorb the information and move forward, and Iris and I would pour more coffee and laugh about it later because we were the kind of friends who had laughed about 1,000 stupider things than this. What it actually was this. Her mouth was warm. That was the first thing. Her mouth was warm and her breath smelled faintly of honey from the toast, and she was being so careful. So careful. You could feel the careful in the way she kept her hand light at my jaw, the way she had not fully closed the distance, the way she was leaving space for me to step back if I was going to step back. I did not step back. I did not, for what felt like a very long time, do anything at all, and the part of my brain that had been doing a running commentary on every detail of the previous 7 minutes of my life went very, very quiet. It was not the technique. There was no technique. It was that her mouth was on mine, and her hand was on my jaw, and somewhere in the second of the 7, I had understood, with the kind of clarity that does not feel like a thought because it was not a thought, that I had been wanting this for a very long time. That is the part I had not expected. That is the part nobody warns you about. They warn you, in a generic culture-wide way, that kissing your best friend will be confusing, that it might change things, that it is the kind of decision people regret. They do not warn you that you might already be regretting the decision before the decision happened, because the decision had simply been the fastest mechanism for making you face something you had been carefully not facing for the entire month of February, and possibly longer than that. By the 4th second, I had moved my hand to her elbow. I did not plan to do it. My hand simply went there, the way hands go to the things that are nearest when you need to hold something to keep yourself upright. By the 5th second, she had made a small sound against my mouth. By the 6th second, I had registered the sound and registered, with absolute precision, what the sound meant. By the 7th second she had stepped back. She did not step back violently. She did not stumble or pull away or do any of the things people do in films. She simply moved her hand off my jaw and stepped one clean step back, the way she stepped away from anything she was no longer going to touch. And she looked at me, and her face, which I had been studying for 10 years, which I had thought I knew the entire library of expressions of, did something I had never seen it do. She said, "All right." I said, "All right." She said, "Okay." I said, "Okay." We stood there. Nobody moved. Eventually, Iris turned around. She picked up the coffee pot. She poured herself another cup. She did not pour me one. I do not think she remembered offering. She held the cup with both hands, the way you hold something to keep yourself anchored. And she looked at the coffee instead of at me, and she said, in a voice that was not quite her voice but was a near perfect imitation of it, "You are going to be fine tomorrow." I said, "Iris?" She said, "You are. You are good at first dates. Like I said, she is going to like you. The first kiss it is just a thing. People do it 1,000 times. You do it once, and then it is just a thing you have done." I said, "Iris, look at me." She said, "I have to take a shower." She set the coffee cup down. She did not, in fact, drink any of the coffee she had just poured. She walked out of the kitchen. I stood at the counter and listened to her go down the hall and listened to the bathroom door close and listened, 2 seconds later, to the shower start. And I stood there for what felt like a very long time, and the kitchen was the same kitchen it had always been, and it was also a kitchen in which a thing had just happened that was going to determine the shape of the rest of my life. I poured myself the coffee Iris had not poured for me. I drank it. I was going on a date the next day with a woman named Talia Brody, who was an architect, who had grown up in California, who had asked me good questions about a manuscript I was editing. I had just kissed my best friend on her invitation, on my request, in our shared kitchen. I had felt for 7 seconds something I had been refusing to feel for the entirety of the year I had been single and possibly for the entirety of the friendship. I did not know what to do with the information. I did not, as it turned out, do anything with it for 48 hours. Iris stayed in the shower for a long time. When she came out, she was dressed for going out. Dark jeans, a soft camel sweater, her hair still damp at the ends. And she said, without sitting down, without making any kind of eye contact, that she had a thing with Ren in Logan Square that she had forgotten about, and that she would probably grab dinner there, and that she would see me later, and she was out the front door before I had finished saying, "Oh, okay." Ren did not exist. Or rather, Ren did exist. Ren was our mutual friend from college, a writer who lived in Logan Square and who Iris had known almost as long as she had known me. But Ren had not made plans with Iris that day, and Iris and I had been close enough for 10 years that neither of us would normally invent a plan to escape the other one's apartment. I knew, watching the door close behind her, that she had invented this one. I knew because she had not paused to take her usual second coat for the cold, and I knew because she had not asked if I wanted anything from the corner store on the way back, and I knew because Iris Kavanagh, when she was telling the truth, looked you in the eye, and Iris Kavanagh had not looked me in the eye since the 7th second of the kiss. I sat in the apartment for the rest of the afternoon. I told myself I was working. I had brought a manuscript home. The edits were due Monday. The book was good and I cared about it. And I should have been able to focus on it for at least an hour. I sat at the kitchen table with the manuscript and a fresh coffee, and I read the same paragraph 4 times and did not absorb a single word of it. I checked my phone 3 times. Iris had not messaged me. I checked it a 4th time. I checked it a 5th. She came home at 11:30 that night. I heard her key in the lock from my bedroom, where I had been lying on top of the duvet with all my clothes on, pretending to read. I listened to her come down the hall. I listened to her stop, briefly, in the middle of the hall, the way you stop when you are deciding which door to look at. I listened to her decide. I listened to her go into her own room and close her own door. She did not knock on mine. I did not knock on hers. The next morning was Sunday, the morning of the date. I did not see Iris before noon. She was up before I was. I could tell because there was coffee already made in the pot, and the kitchen had the slightly tidied quality it had in the mornings when she had gotten up early. But she was not in the apartment by the time I came out of my room. There was no note. There was no message. There was a coffee pot full of coffee, and a clean kitchen, and the soft early afternoon light of a March Sunday, and the empty apartment of a person I had been living with for 3 months, and had, the morning before, kissed for 7 seconds in the very kitchen I was now standing in alone. I had a date in 3 hours. I went to my room. I tried on 3 outfits. I settled on dark jeans and a soft red sweater, and the silver earrings my grandmother had given me when I graduated college. I looked at myself in the mirror in the hall. I looked, I thought, fine. I looked, I thought, like a person who could walk into a coffee shop in Wicker Park at 3 in the afternoon and make conversation with another person about architecture and California, and the specific manuscript that the other person had asked good questions about. I did not look like a person who had kissed her best friend the morning before. That was the trick of it. That was the impossible thing. You could do something in the kitchen of your own apartment at 10 in the morning that completely rewrote the architecture of your own internal life, and your face, 26 hours later, would still be your face. The same earrings, the same sweater, the same brown eyes my mother had been looking at for 28 years. There was no exterior evidence at all. I left the apartment at 2:40. Iris was still not home. The coffee shop was warm and full and slightly too loud, in the way coffee shops in Wicker Park are slightly too loud on Sunday afternoons in March. I saw Talia before she saw me. She was sitting at a table near the back, in a soft cream sweater and dark trousers, her hair pulled back, scrolling on her phone with the unself-conscious ease of a person who was not currently waiting for anything except her coffee to cool. She looked up. She saw me. She smiled. She had a good smile. I want to be clear about that. Talia Brody had a genuine, warm, room-rearranging smile, and when she stood up and said, "Hi, you must be Mira," in a voice that was lower than I had expected and softer at the edges than her photographs had suggested, I felt the small, specific click of a person clicking into the present moment. We talked for 2 hours. She was, as advertised, an architect. She was, as advertised, from California, originally from a small town outside Santa Cruz where her parents still lived. She had moved to Chicago for a job and stayed for the city, which she described with the bright, slightly defensive affection of a transplant who had decided to commit. She asked me about the manuscript I had mentioned. She asked me about my family. She told me, when I asked, about her own family, and she told me well. Her father had been a high school history teacher. Her mother had run a small bookstore. Her younger brother had stayed in California and had 2 children, and she described all of these people with the warm, exact specificity of someone who actually loved them. I liked her. That was the part I had not been prepared for. I had been prepared for the date to be fine. I had been prepared for it to be pleasant, for Talia to be pleasant, for me to leave the coffee shop and feel reassured that the dating app experiment was a reasonable thing. I had not been prepared to like her, to find her, in person, more interesting than her messages had suggested. To find that the first time I caught myself looking at her mouth while she was speaking, the looking was not unpleasant. I had not been prepared to think about Iris. I thought about Iris. I thought about Iris when Talia was in the middle of a story about a building in Pilsen that was being preserved against the wishes of 3 different developers, and the story was good, and Talia was telling it well, and somewhere in the 3rd minute of it I realized that I had been thinking, for the entire duration of the previous 15 seconds, about the kitchen the morning before, and about Iris's mouth on mine, and about the small sound she had made in the 6th second. I forced my attention back to the building in Pilsen. I asked a follow-up question. Talia answered. She walked me to the corner at the end of the date. The afternoon had turned colder, the light flattening into the gray-blue dusk of a Chicago Sunday in March, and she stood at the corner with me waiting for the light to change, and she said, "I had a really nice time. I said, "Me too." She said, "I would like to see you again." I said, "I would like that." She said, "Can I—" She did not finish the sentence. She tilted her head. She looked at my mouth briefly, and she looked at my eyes. And she was waiting to see if I was going to give her the small sign that you give a person to indicate that yes, you would also like that. You would like the very small kiss on the corner of a Chicago street that ends a successful first date. I nodded. She kissed me. It was a small kiss. It was a perfectly normal 2-second gentle kiss on the corner of a city block. And Talia did it well, and her hand was warm where it touched my elbow. And she smelled like soft citrus and clean wool. And she smiled when she pulled back and said, "I'll text you." And I said, "Please do." And she walked one way and I walked the other. I got on the train. I rode 3 stops. I sat in the train looking out the window at a city I had lived in for 10 years, and I tried, very deliberately and with all the focus I could organize, to think about the kiss I had just received instead of the kiss I had received the morning before. I could not. I could not, on the train ride home, locate the kiss with Talia in my body at all. It had happened. I knew it had happened. I had been there. But the physical memory of it had no weight, no specific sensory texture, no place I could return to. It was a fact about my Sunday afternoon. It was a fact I would have to tell someone. Iris, presumably. The friend I told everything to. The friend who lived in my apartment. The friend whose mouth I could still, with absolute clarity, feel against my own. And the fact was going to land in the air between us with a specific kind of weight I did not yet know the size of. I got off the train. I walked the 4 blocks home. I unlocked the door. The apartment was lit. Not fully. Iris had turned on the kitchen light and the small lamp by the sofa, the soft, warm corners of an apartment that was waiting up for someone. And Iris was sitting on the couch with a glass of red wine in her hand and a book open on her lap, and her feet pulled up under her. And she looked up when I came in, and for the first time in 28 hours, she met my eyes. She said, "Hi." I said, "Hi." She said, "How was it?" I said, "It was good." She said, "That's good." She said, "I poured you a glass." There was, I saw now, a second glass on the coffee table. Half full. Waiting. I took my coat off slowly. I hung it on the hook by the door. I slipped my shoes off and lined them up the way I had lined them up for 3 months. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. Not next to her, not at the far end, but in the middle distance, in the spot I usually sat in when we were watching films together. And I picked up the glass of wine. I said, "Thank you." She said, "Of course." We sat in silence for a long moment. The lamp was warm. The wine was a red I recognized as the one she had bought at the wine store on Damen the week she moved my last boxes in. The book in her lap was, I saw now, upside down. I said, "Your book is upside down." She closed it without looking at it. She said, "Mira." I said, "Iris." She said, "She kissed you." At the end. It was not a question. I did not know how she knew. I did not know if she knew because it was the kind of thing a person could see on someone's face, or because she had been thinking about it for 28 hours, or because she was simply telling me she had been imagining the end of the date in enough detail that the ending had become, for her, a fact. I said, "Yes." She said, "Was it nice?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I'm glad." She was not glad. She was saying glad in the same near-perfect imitation of her voice she had used in the kitchen the morning before, and she was holding her wine glass with both hands, and she was looking at the lamp instead of at me. I said, "Iris?" She said, "Mira, I am going to be very honest with you for 1 minute, and then I would like us to never discuss this again." I said, "Okay." She said, "I should not have done what I did yesterday." I said, "I asked you to." She said, "That does not change what I should have done." I said, "What should you have done?" She said no. I said, "Why didn't you?" She looked at me. The lamp was very warm, and the apartment was very quiet. And Iris Kavanagh was looking at me across 2 cushions of a couch we had bought together in a thrift store on Milwaukee Avenue. And her eyes were the gray Atlantic gray they had always been, and they were also doing something I had never seen them do, and I knew with absolute clarity, the way you know a thing that you have been refusing to know, what the answer to my question was. She did not say it. She set her wineglass down. She uncurled her legs from under her. She stood up. She said, "I am going to bed." I said, "Iris, please." She said, "Mira, please." She walked past me. Her shoulder did not touch mine, but I felt the displacement of the air she moved through, the specific cool draft of a person leaving a couch you had been sharing. She walked down the hall. She closed her bedroom door. I sat on the couch with my glass of wine and the upside-down book she had left on the cushion, and I listened to the small, ordinary sounds of an apartment with 2 people in it who were not speaking, and I understood, with the absolute clarity that had been arriving in installments for 48 hours, that I was in serious trouble. I had been in love with my best friend. She had been in love with me. I had a date next Saturday with a woman who had a good smile and a careful walk, and a job in architecture and a story about a building in Pilsen, and I was going to have to decide, in the next 6 days, what I was going to do about any of it. I sat on the couch for a long time. I did not finish the wine. Eventually, I went to my room. I lay on top of the duvet in the dark, in my dark jeans and my soft red sweater and my grandmother's silver earrings, and I stared at the ceiling, and I thought about the 7 seconds in the kitchen, and I thought about Talia at the corner, and I thought about Iris closing her door, and I thought about the fact that you could go 10 years knowing exactly who you were, exactly who the people you loved were, and exactly what shape your life was. And you could lose every single one of those certainties in a single Saturday morning over a piece of toast. I did not sleep that night either. I was beginning to think I might never sleep again. I slept eventually, maybe 2 hours. The kind of sleep that is not really sleep, but a kind of low-grade unconsciousness the body insists on when the mind has worn itself out. And I woke up at 6:15 on Monday morning with my clothes still on and my grandmother's earrings pressing into the side of my neck. The apartment was already moving. I could hear Iris in the kitchen, the familiar sounds of her morning. The kettle clicking on, a cabinet opening, the soft rasp of the coffee scoop against the side of the canister. I lay in the dark with my eyes open and I listened to a person I had lived with for 3 months performing the most ordinary acts of a Monday morning, and I thought about the way human bodies carry on. The way you can have your entire interior architecture rearranged at 11:20 on a Sunday night and still need, by 6:15 on a Monday morning, to drink coffee and put on shoes. I gave her 10 minutes. When I came out into the kitchen, she was already dressed. Black trousers, a charcoal sweater, her hair pulled back. She was standing at the counter with her coffee in one hand and her phone in the other, scrolling through something with the focused frown of a person who was using the screen as a reason not to look up. The toast was already eaten. The plate was already in the sink. The kitchen was as tidied as it had been the morning before, in the specific way Iris tidied things when she was trying to control one variable in a room she could not control everything in. I said, "Good morning." She said, "Morning." She did not look up. I said, "Did you sleep okay?" She said, "Fine. You?" I said, "Not really." She said, "That's a shame." She did not look up. I poured a cup of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table. I waited, with the small reserves of patience I had left, for her to look at me. She did not. She finished her coffee at the counter, standing, and she rinsed the cup, and she said, "I have an early call. I need to go." And she picked up her bag and her coat from the chair, and she was at the door before I had said anything else. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. She said, "Mira." I said, "Yes." She said, "I am not angry." I said, "I know." She said, "I just need a few days." I said, "Okay." She said, "I will come back to it. I promise." I said, "I know." She left. She was gone before I had finished my coffee. I sat at the kitchen table in the apartment that had 10 days ago, been the most comfortable room in the city, and I held my coffee with both hands. And I thought about the words she had used. I will come back to it. Like it was an item on a list. Like it was a manuscript she would return to when she had time. Iris Kavanagh, who had never in 10 years of friendship needed time from me, was telling me she needed a few days. The phrasing was a kindness. The phrasing was also in the specific way that the most generous phrasing can be, a wound. I went to work. I survived Monday. I survived Tuesday. I survived Wednesday. The apartment, in those 3 days, became the architecture of careful avoidance. Iris was up before I was. She came home after I had gone to bed. On the rare crossings, Tuesday evening when I came home early because of a migraine and found her in the kitchen mid-pour of a glass of water. Wednesday morning when we ended up in the bathroom hallway at the same moment, her toothbrush in her hand, my hair still wet from the shower. We treated each other with the specific, terrible politeness of two people who had decided, by mutual unspoken agreement, that they were going to be civil first and figure out the rest later. I hated it. I hated it more than I had hated almost anything that had ever happened to me. And I had been through a long list of difficult things by 28. And I knew the rough shape of grief, and the rough shape of disappointment, and the rough shape of the small daily attritions that come from being a person in the world. This was different. This had a specific quality I had not encountered before, which was the quality of missing a person who was sleeping in the room next to yours. Talia texted on Wednesday afternoon. She said, "Are you free Saturday? There is a place in the West Loop I have been wanting to try. 7 o'clock?" I stared at the message for a long time. The rational answer, the answer the manageable version of myself would have given, was no. The rational answer was, "Talia, I had a wonderful time on Sunday, but I have realized that I have something I need to address in my own life before I can be a fair person to anyone else, and I am sorry for the timing of this realization." The rational answer would have been honest. It would have been kind. It would have been, on balance, the thing that did the least damage to the largest number of people. I said yes. I want to be clear about why I said yes, because looking back at that Wednesday afternoon, I can see the specific shape of the cowardice involved, and I do not want to pretend it was anything other than what it was. I said yes because I was 28 years old, and I had spent 48 hours absorbing the largest piece of new information about myself that had ever arrived. And the easiest thing in the world was to keep moving, to accept the date, to put one functional weekend on the calendar, to act for one more cycle, as if the architecture of the previous week was still standing. I told myself it was research. I told myself I was going to find out, at the dinner in the West Loop on Saturday, whether what had happened in the kitchen with Iris was a one-time emergency or a permanent change. I told myself a person should not make a permanent decision based on 7 seconds in a kitchen. I told myself a lot of things. I did not tell Iris about the Saturday plan. I told myself I would tell her when there was something to tell, the same lie I had told myself 10 days earlier. I had become a person who used the same lie twice in one fortnight, and I was not yet able to look that fact directly in the face. Wednesday night, Iris was already in her room when I came home. The kitchen light was off. The apartment had the specific dark quiet of a person who had gone to bed early on purpose. Thursday, she was up before me again. Thursday afternoon, she sent me a text. The first text she had sent me since Saturday morning. It said, "Going to Ren's tonight. We'll probably stay over. There is leftover soup in the fridge if you want it." I said, "Okay, thank you. Tell Ren I say hi." She said, "Will do." It was, I realized, the most communication we had exchanged in 5 days. She did stay at Ren's. She came home Friday afternoon with the small overnight bag she kept by the front door, and she did not look at me when she put it back in its corner, and she said, "I am going to take a long shower, and then I am going to make dinner. Do you want any?" I said, "Yes, please." She said, "It'll be ready in about an hour." She made dinner. It was, I want to record this honestly, a very good dinner. She made the pasta with the lemon and the brown butter that she had been making for 10 years. the one her mother had taught her, the one that I had eaten at her dorm room and her studio apartment, and her first real apartment, and now in our shared kitchen. She set the table. She poured us each a small glass of wine. She sat down across from me and she said, "All right, I think I am ready to talk about this. Are you?" I said, "Yes." She said, "I owe you a real apology." I said, "No, you don't." She said, "Mira, please, let me do this." I said, "Okay." She said, "I should not have agreed to what you asked me to do on Saturday morning. You were nervous, and you asked me a thing in the spirit of asking your best friend a thing, and I took advantage of—" I said, "You did not take advantage of anything." She said, "Mira." I said, "Iris, I am going to interrupt this entire apology because I do not accept the framing of it. You did not take advantage of me. I asked you. You said it was a bad idea. I asked you anyway. You agreed once. That is what happened. You do not get to apologize for being asked." She looked at me across the table. She said, "But I had a reason for saying it was a bad idea." I said, "I know you did." She said, "Do you?" I said, "I do." She said, "What do you think the reason was?" The kitchen was very still. The lemon and the brown butter and the small wine glasses and Iris Kavanagh across from me with her hands flat on the table on either side of her plate, like she was bracing herself. I had a window. I had, in the specific texture of that moment, the chance to say it cleanly. To say, the reason was that you have feelings for me, the same feelings I have just figured out I have for you, and the 7 seconds in the kitchen were not a favor. They were the first true thing either of us has done in a decade. I did not say it. What I said instead, because cowardice does not arrive in dramatic forms, it arrives in small, precise installments, was, "I think you were worried it would change things between us." Iris held my gaze for 1 second longer than was comfortable. Then she said, "Yes, that." She picked up her wine. She said, "Well, I am sorry that I let it." I said, "I am the one who let it." She said, "You can let me share the responsibility, Mira. You are not always the only person in a room." I said, "Fine." She said, "Are we going to be okay?" I said, "Yes." She said, "The date last Sunday. With Talia." I said, "Yes." She said, "Are you going to see her again?" I said, "Saturday." She said, "Oh." I said, "Dinner. In the West Loop." She said, "That is good. That is a lovely thing." Talia sounds, based on what little I have learned about her from your reports, Talia sounds like a person worth seeing twice. I said, "She is." She said, "I am glad." We ate. And we talked about smaller things, and by the time we had finished the pasta, we had each said enough small things in the right order that the apartment had begun, by some grace I did not understand, to feel like the apartment again. Iris told me a story about her project at work. I told her about an editor on my floor who had cried at the printer. She laughed, and I laughed, and the laughing felt like the laughing always had. The specific shared frequency of two people who had been laughing at the same things for 10 years. I went to sleep on Friday night believing for the first time in 6 days that we had survived it. Saturday I went to dinner with Talia. The restaurant was the kind of place architects took people on second dates. Beautiful in the slightly self-conscious way places designed by friends of friends are beautiful. Exposed brick that had been carefully unexposed and then re-exposed. Lighting that flattered everyone in the room without anyone being able to identify why. Talia was already there when I arrived, in dark jeans and a soft black sweater, and the kind of subtle silver jewelry that told you she had very specific taste and had paid for it without making a thing of it. She stood up when I walked in. She kissed my cheek. She held my chair. I want to record what I want to record about this dinner, because honesty matters, and I am trying to be honest now. Talia was wonderful. She was wonderful in the specific way that some people, for reasons that have nothing to do with you, are exactly the right person to be on a Saturday night second date with. She told me a story about a building in Pilsen with the same warmth she had told me about it the previous weekend, And the second telling was even better than the first because she had clearly thought about which parts I had liked and which parts to expand on. She asked me about my week. She listened to my answers. When I told her, vaguely, that the week had been more emotionally complicated than I had expected, she did not pry. She said, "That is the kind of week that needs a good dinner." She had a good smile. She had a careful walk. She had the kind of attentive, unself-conscious kindness that you can recognize on a person within 20 minutes of meeting them, the way you can recognize a well-built chair. I sat across from her under the carefully unexposed brick, and I thought, for almost the entire 2 hours of the dinner, about Iris. I thought about the way Iris had said yes when I had asked her for the practice. I thought about the 7 seconds. I thought about the small sound in the 6th second. I thought about the fact that Iris had told me, in our kitchen the night before, that she was glad I was going on this date, and that she was glad with the specific Irish lilt of a woman who had been being honest about exactly half of what she was saying and giving the other half to me as a gift in the form of a lie. By the time the dessert plates had been cleared, I had decided. I said, "Talia." She said, I said, "I have to be honest with you about something." She set her glass down. She had the open, attentive expression of a person who was listening to the sentence that was about to follow with the full available bandwidth of her attention. I said, "You are wonderful. I want to say that first. You are kind and you are thoughtful, and you are the kind of dinner partner that a person should keep showing up for. And I am realizing as I sit here that I am not in a place to be a fair person back to you. There is something I need to address in my own life that I have been avoiding addressing, and continuing to see you while I avoid it would be unkind to you in a way you do not deserve." Talia looked at me for a long second. Then she said, "Is it the friend?" I said, "What?" She said, "On Sunday, when you told me about your week, you used the word complicated about 3 times, and twice the complicated was something you trailed off on." I wondered. I said yes. She said, "Ah." I said, "I am sorry. I should not have come tonight. I should have figured this out before I came to dinner. I have wasted your evening and I am embarrassed by it." Talia said, "Mira, you have not wasted my evening." She said, "I have had a very nice dinner with someone I think I would have really liked to keep getting to know. The fact that the timing is not right is unfortunate, and not anyone's fault. Don't put us in a category we do not belong in." I said, "You are being very generous." She said, "I am being honest. You do not owe me a relationship because we matched on an app and ate 2 meals together. You owe me the truth, which you have just given me, and which I appreciate." I said, "Thank you." She said, "Can I give you one piece of advice?" I said, "Please." She said, "Whoever the friend is, do not wait. The way you described your week. Twice you started a sentence and stopped. Twice your face did a particular thing it did not do when you talked about anything else. Whatever the situation is, you already know what you want. The waiting is the unkind part. To you, and to her." I said, "How did you know it was a her?" Talia said, "You said your week was emotionally complicated. You did not say your week was emotionally complicated with my friend. You said with the friend. You used the article like a person trying not to give something away." I said, "You should have been a detective." She said, "Architecture is mostly detective work with worse hours." We split the bill. We hugged, briefly and warmly, on the sidewalk outside the restaurant. She wished me good luck. I wished her better luck than me, which was true, and she laughed. And she said, "Oh, sweetheart, take care of yourself." And she walked one way, and I walked the other. It was 8:45. I called a car. I sat in the back of the car all the way home, and I did not look at my phone because I was afraid that if I looked at my phone I would back out of the only good decision I had made in 9 days. The driver had the radio on low, some quiet jazz station, and the Saturday night city slid past the window in the soft yellow streetlights, and I rehearsed, in the back of my head, a version of the conversation I had been refusing to have for 10 years. I did not get to use the version I rehearsed. I never do. Nobody ever does. Conversations are not the things you rehearse. The rehearsed versions are something you do for your own nervous system, a kind of stretching. And when the conversation actually arrives, it arrives in its own shape, and you stand in it and say what you can. I unlocked the apartment door at 9:20. The apartment was dark. The kitchen light was off. The lamp by the sofa was off. For one terrible second I thought she was already in bed, that I had missed the window, that I would have to wait until morning, and the thought of waiting another hour was almost unbearable. Then I saw her. She was sitting on the kitchen floor. Not on a chair. On the floor. Her back against the cabinets under the sink, her knees drawn up, a glass of wine on the linoleum beside her. The only light in the kitchen was the small light over the stove, the soft warm one you left on at night when you did not want full brightness. Iris was in her gray sweatshirt and the soft black leggings, her hair loose, her face turned up toward the ceiling and her eyes closed when I came in. She opened her eyes when she heard the door. I said, "Iris?" She said, "You are home early." I said, "Yes." She said, "How was dinner?" I said I told her I could not see her again. The apartment held that sentence for a long moment. Iris did not move from the floor. She looked at me from the floor with the steady gray attention I had been studying for 10 years, and she said, in a voice so careful and so thin I could hear what she was holding underneath it, "Why?" I said, "May I sit down?" She said, "Please." I sat on the floor of the kitchen across from her, not against the opposite cabinets. There was not enough space. Our knees would have touched, but at an angle, my back against the dishwasher, my knees pulled up to match hers. The kitchen floor was cold through my jeans. I had not, until that moment, ever sat on the floor of this kitchen. I said, "Iris." She said, "Mira." I said, "I am going to say a thing that I should have said on Saturday morning and did not, and on Sunday night and did not, and on Friday at dinner and did not, and I am going to say it now, and you are going to listen to all of it before you say anything back. Is that all right?" She said, "Yes." I said, "I asked you to practice with me on Saturday morning because I was nervous about Sunday afternoon. That was the thing I told myself. That was the thing I told you. I want you to know that I believe, sitting here now, that I was telling myself the truth about that part. I did not have a plan. I was not running a strategy on you. The asking happened, and we both let it happen. And the kissing happened, and I have spent the entire week since Saturday morning doing what I do when something difficult arrives, which is trying to outrun it with logistics. I went on a date with Talia on Sunday. I scheduled a second date with Talia on Wednesday. I let you apologize to me on Friday for something that was not yours to apologize for. I went to dinner tonight. I let her be wonderful at me for 2 hours. I have been running. Iris said nothing. I said, "What I am trying to tell you is that the 7 seconds in the kitchen were not 7 seconds for me. They were 7 seconds. And then they were a Sunday afternoon I do not actually remember. They were 7 seconds. And then they were 3 nights of not sleeping. They were 7 seconds, and then they were Talia asking me what was wrong tonight at the table, and me realizing that I was sitting under good lighting across from a kind woman, and I could not feel any of it, because the only thing I could feel was the 10,000 previous Saturdays I have spent in this apartment with you, and the one specific Saturday last week when something broke open that I had been pretending was not broken open for at least the last 2 months. And possibly the last 10 years. Iris did not move. I said, "I am in love with you." The kitchen held that one too. I said, "I do not know how long. I have been thinking about it all week. I think I have been in love with you for a much longer time than I am ready to admit yet. I think the specific reason I asked you on Saturday morning, the specific reason I picked you and not the actual rational solution, which would have been to stop downloading dating apps in the middle of an obvious crisis, is that I have been wanting you to put your mouth on mine for at least the past 3 months and possibly much longer than that. And the favor was the only frame I could find that allowed me to ask for it without admitting to myself what I was asking for." She made a small sound. I did not look up to identify what kind of sound. I had committed to delivering all of this without watching her face do anything in response, because if I watched her face do anything in response, I was going to lose my nerve. I said, "I do not know what you want me to do with this. I am telling it to you because I owe it to you. I am telling it to you because tonight on the sidewalk, a woman I had known for 10 days asked me why I was wasting her time, in extremely polite language. And I did not have a good answer except that I had been wasting her time because I was afraid of using your time correctly. I am telling it to you because I came home an hour ago thinking I was going to wait until tomorrow morning to have this conversation, and instead you are sitting on the kitchen floor in the dark, and I do not think a person sits on the kitchen floor in the dark when they have any other tools left." Iris said, "Mira." I said, "I am not finished." She said, "Sorry." I said, "The last thing I want to tell you is that whatever you say back, whatever the shape of it, whatever you have been holding for however long you have been holding it, I am not going to ask you to be brave on a timeline. I have spent a week running. You have spent, I do not know how long. I am not going to ask you to do in 3 minutes what I could not do in 7 days. If you need time, I will give you time. If you need me to not be here, I will not be here. If the answer is that the 7 seconds were a real thing for you also, and you have known it for longer than I have, and you did not tell me because you were protecting something, I want you to know that I have just stopped protecting it on my end, and you do not have to either." I stopped. I made myself look up. Iris was crying. Not loudly. Not even visibly in the specific way some people cry. There were 2 tears, one on each cheek, moving slowly, and her face was as composed as her face was always composed, and her hands were flat against the linoleum on either side of her hips, and she was looking at me with the gray Atlantic eyes I had been studying for 10 years, and they were doing something I had never, in a decade of studying them, seen them do. She said, "Mira." I said, "Yes." She said, "I have been in love with you since the 2nd year of college." The kitchen contracted. She said, "I want you to understand that I did not know it for the first 6 months of it. I thought I was just paying attention. I thought you were the most interesting person in my life because you were the most interesting person in my life. I figured it out, properly, around February of 2nd year. You had had a fight with your mother, and you came over to my dorm at 11 at night with a bottle of cheap wine, and you cried at my desk for 45 minutes, and then you fell asleep on my floor, and I sat on my bed and looked at you, sleeping on my floor, and I understood, with absolute clarity, what had been happening to me for the previous fall semester. I said, "Oh." She said, "I had a choice. I made it that night. I decided that you were the most important friend I had ever had, that you were figuring out a lot of difficult things with your family and your career and your life, and that you trusted me with all of it, and that telling you what I had just figured out about myself would change the shape of that trust in ways that might be very bad for you and would definitely be very selfish of me. I decided to be your friend instead. I decided to be the best friend I knew how to be. I have been making that decision every day for 10 years, and I want you to know that until last Saturday morning, I was very, very sure I had made the right one." I said, "Iris." She said, "The move-in changed it. I knew it would." That is not honest. Let me be more honest. I suspected it would, and I did it anyway, because the part of me that has been making the right decision for 10 years was outvoted, on a Saturday in November, by the part of me that wanted you to be in the same apartment as me for as long as you would let me have you. That was a selfish call. I have been paying for it since the 3rd week of January. I said, "You have been," she said, "paying." Yes. Quietly. Privately. In the way I have always paid for the things I want and am not allowed to want. I said, "Iris." She said, "When you told me on Saturday morning that you had a date with a woman, I want you to know that the version of me that has been your friend for 10 years was very, very glad for you. That was real. That part. The version of me that has been alphabetical to her own feelings for a decade understood. with the same clarity as the night on my dorm floor, that you were figuring something out about yourself, and that the figuring was good and important, and not in any way about me, she said. When you asked me to practice, the version of me that has been your friend for 10 years tried to say no. I said, I know. She said, I want to be clear that I said yes anyway. The yes was mine. You did not bully me. You did not take advantage of anything. I agreed because the part of me that has been outvoted for 10 years got, for one specific Saturday morning, to take a vote. And the kissing was not 7 seconds for me either, Mira. It was... I have not slept properly in 6 days. I have been sitting on the floor of the kitchen for the last 45 minutes, because I could not bear to be in the room I share with the absence of you in it. I have been conducting an entire week of polite conversation with you while my chest was open in front of you, and I was trying to keep my hand over the opening so you would not see. I said, Iris. She said, what? I said, come here. She did not, immediately, come. She looked at me from her side of the kitchen floor, with the 2 slow tears and the linoleum cold and the small light over the stove, and her face was doing something I cannot fully describe, except by saying that it was the most honest expression I had ever seen on it. And underneath the honesty, it was also doing something that was simpler and older and more frightened than anything I had ever seen her be. She said, are you sure? I said yes. She said, are you sure, Mira? Because if you say come here and I come, we are not doing the version where this goes back. There is no version of after this where we go back. And I have spent 10 years building a version where if it ever came to this, I would let you have one chance to walk it back. I said, I am sure. She said, Mira. I said, Iris Kavanaugh, please come here. She came. She did not cross the room theatrically. She moved along the floor on her knees until she was in front of me, and she put one hand on my knee, and she looked up at me, and she said, very quietly, hi. I said, hi. She said, the kissing on Saturday morning was not the first time I have wanted to do that. I said, I know. She said, would you like to do it without the practice frame? I said yes. She leaned up on her knees. I leaned forward off the dishwasher. We met somewhere in the small, uncertain middle of the kitchen floor, her hands going to either side of my face this time, both of them, the carefulness of the previous Saturday gone, replaced with something that was not less careful, but was differently careful, the careful of a person who had decided that careful was the only available speed and had stopped pretending it was a tactical choice. The second kiss was not 7 seconds. I do not know how long the second kiss was. I know that her mouth tasted like the small amount of red wine she had been drinking on the floor, and the faint spice of the toothpaste she had been using for 10 years, and I know that her hands were not light against my face, the way they had been against my jaw the previous Saturday. They were warmer, and steadier, and they did not let go in the 6th second. I know that she made the small sound again, in the second kiss, in approximately the same place she had made it in the first kiss, and I know that this time when she made the sound I did not have to wonder what it meant. I know that my hand went to the back of her neck without any specific instruction from any conscious part of my brain, and her hair was warm there, and the line of her shoulders went still under my hand, the way a body goes still when it has been bracing for a thing for a long time and has finally been allowed to put the bracing down. When we eventually stopped, we stopped because we needed to breathe, and because Iris's left foot had gone numb, and because I had begun to laugh. Quietly, against the edge of her jaw. The small, involuntary laugh of a person who had just realized that the most important conversation of her life had taken place on the floor of her own kitchen on a Saturday in March. Iris pulled back. Not far. An inch. She said, "Why are you laughing?" I said, "We are sitting on the floor." She said, "Yes?" I said, "I am wearing the dinner clothes." She said, "You look very nice in them, for the record." I said, "You are wearing the sweatshirt." She said, "I have always done my best work in the sweatshirt." I said, "Evidence supports." She closed her eyes briefly. Her forehead came down against mine. We sat like that for a long moment, the small light over the stove and the cold linoleum and our two foreheads touching, and I felt the whole long week of running stop running. She said, "What now?" I said, "Now we get off the floor." She said, "That is a structural answer, not a strategic one." I said, "Iris, I have just spent 40 minutes on the floor of our kitchen, telling you the most important thing I have ever told anyone, and I do not have a strategy. I have a sense that we are going to figure it out. I have a sense that we are going to have to be honest with each other in the way you and I have been honest about everything else for 10 years except about this. I have a sense that I am going to need you to keep telling me the truth, even when it costs you, the way you have been not telling me the truth for a decade, and I think you are going to have to let me do the same. I do not have a plan past. Can we go sit on the couch instead of the kitchen floor?" She said, "Mira." I said, "What?" She said, "That is more of a plan than I have had in 10 years. We got off the floor. Her left foot was, in fact, numb. She leaned on me for the first 30 seconds of standing, until the feeling came back, and the leaning was so ordinary and so specifically unromantic. The small, absurd, practical detail of a body that had been sitting funny on a hard floor, that I felt the last bit of fear let go. We were going to be okay. We were going to be okay because we had 10 years of figuring out small, ordinary, practical things together, and the kissing was not going to undo that. It was going to be added to it. We sat on the couch. We sat on the couch for a long time, in the way two people sit on a couch when they have just survived something. We did not talk about logistics. We did not talk about what we were going to tell our friends, or whether I was going to keep paying her rent, or what to do, about the fact that I had been on a second date with another woman exactly 4 hours earlier. We sat with her head on my shoulder and my hand in her hair, and at some point, I do not know exactly when, I was not paying attention to time. We both fell asleep. I woke up at 6 in the morning. The light through the windows was the soft pale of a Sunday morning in March, and Iris was tucked against my side with her face pressed into my collarbone and one hand curled under her chin, and she was asleep with the absolute, surrendered sleep of a person who had not slept for a week. I did not move for a long time. I let her sleep. I looked at her face in the pale gray light, and I thought about the dorm kitchen in our first semester and the salt that had not been there, and I thought about 1,000 small Saturday mornings, and I thought about the specific quality of time, the way it can take 10 years to do a thing, and then approximately 12 hours to do the rest of it. She woke up around 9. She lifted her head. Her hair was creased on one side. She looked at me with the half-asleep confusion of a person reorienting to where they were, and then her face cleared. And then her face did something I did not have a previous catalog entry for, which I will describe only by saying that it was the look of a person remembering something good. She said, "Hi." I said, "Hi." She said, "Are you okay?" I said, "I am very okay." "Are you?" She said, "Yes." She said, "What happens now?" I said, "Now we drink coffee." She said, "That is also a structural answer." I said, "Iris, we have an entire Sunday. We have a Sunday, and then we have, presumably, a Monday, and a Tuesday, and so on. I do not think we have to figure out everything before lunch." She said, "Fair." We drank coffee. We made breakfast. Eggs and toast, the same toast as the previous Saturday, with the same butter and the same honey. And we ate at the kitchen counter standing up, the way we had eaten breakfast 1,000 times in 3 months. Except that this time, while she was reaching for the salt, I put my hand at the small of her back, just for a moment, just because I could. And she leaned into it without looking up and said, "Salt, please," in the same voice she had used to ask about salt in our dorm kitchen at 18. And I almost laughed again, and I almost cried, and I did neither, and I just handed her the salt. We told Ren on the following Friday. We told Ren over dinner at the Logan Square apartment, the 3 of us at her small round table, and Ren, who had been our friend since we were 19, and who had, as it turned out, suspected something for a length of time she was not willing to specify, listened to us say it without saying a single thing for 30 seconds, and then she stood up, and she walked to the kitchen, and she came back with 3 glasses and a bottle of champagne she said she had been saving. And she said, "Took you long enough. Sit there. Do not move. I am going to make a toast I have been working on for approximately 7 years." Iris said, "Ren." Ren said, "What?" Iris said, "You have been working on a toast for 7 years." Ren said, "Iris, I love you, and you are the smartest person I know, and you are also a deeply, deeply slow learner." The toast was good. I will not record it here, because some things should belong to the night they happened in, but I will say that Ren cried twice in the middle of it, and that Iris sat next to me with her hand on my knee under the table, and that I drank champagne in a kitchen in Logan Square on a Friday in March, and felt for the first time since the Saturday morning toast like the world had returned to a shape that made sense. We told my mother 3 weeks later. That conversation is its own conversation, and it took its own time, and it ended, eventually, in a place I will describe as good, even though it did not start there. I want to say only this. My mother, who had been worried for years that I was going to spend my life choosing the practical thing over the right thing, took one look at Iris across her dining room table and, by the end of the dinner, was already explaining to Iris how to make the specific Filipino chicken adobo that my grandmother had taught her, with the small variations that only she made, and Iris was writing down the instructions on the back of a napkin because she had not brought a notebook, and my mother does not believe in dictating recipes to phones. Talia and I crossed paths once, 6 months later, at a gallery opening in Westtown. She was there with a tall woman in a beautiful linen suit who turned out to be a doctor named Sasha, and we made small, kind eye contact across the room, and at some point in the second hour she came over and squeezed my hand and said, "You look happy, Mira," and I said, "I am." And she said, "Good." And that was all of it. And the all of it was correct. Iris and I are still in the apartment. We never moved the navy throw blanket. We added a second one, a soft cream cable knit Iris's mother sent from Dublin. And the throw blankets continue to be the small, ongoing joke of our shared life. I still pay her rent. We had a disagreement about the rent for approximately 3 weeks in May, which we resolved by Iris pointing out, accurately, that I had been paying her rent for 3 months before there was any other reason to be paying her rent, and that the reason I had been paying her rent had been to maintain the integrity of our roommate arrangement, and that the roommate arrangement no longer needed protecting, which meant I could either keep paying her rent or admit that I had been wrong about the rent in the first place. I chose to keep paying the rent. I did this in part because Iris found it funny, and in part because the joke had become the architecture, and we had not, after the kitchen floor, become the kind of people who tore down architecture for the sake of being right. I look her in the eyes now. I want to record that. The title of this story, the thing the title says, is not true anymore. I could not look her in the eyes for 96 hours after the 7 seconds in the kitchen, and I believed, at the time, that I was never going to be able to look her in the eyes again, that I was going to have to develop an entire system of looking at the wall behind her, or the kettle next to her, or the second button of her sweater, that I was going to have to learn an entirely new way of being in a room with the most important person I had ever met, because I had broken the part of us that allowed direct looking. I was wrong. I look her in the eyes now, on the couch, in the kitchen, across a small round table at Ren's, in the back of the cab home from a friend's wedding in October, when she fell asleep with her head on my shoulder and her hand in mine, and woke up at the streetlight and looked at me and said, "Are we home?" And I said, "Almost." I look her in the eyes when she is talking about her work, and when she is laughing at something her mother has just said on the phone in Dublin, and when she is standing at the kitchen window at 3 in the morning on the bad nights when her insomnia comes back, and I have come out to stand with her because we have decided, by mutual unspoken agreement, that we are no longer the kind of people who let each other stand at the kitchen window alone. I look her in the eyes the way you look at the thing you have decided you are going to be looking at for the rest of your life, with the small, daily, ongoing relief of having finally been allowed to look. The kitchen, where it began, is still the kitchen. We have eaten approximately 10,000 toasts at the counter. We have made approximately 500 dinners at the table. The light through the window in the late morning of a Chicago March is still the soft, honest gray it was on the Saturday of the 7 seconds, and sometimes, when I stand in that exact light, and Iris is in that exact spot at the counter, I feel the small, involuntary echo of the original morning. The way she set the butter knife down, the way she put one hand at my jaw, the way she said, "Breathe." I breathe. I have been breathing, mostly, since